Hey, good morning and welcome to the Collective Church NWA online experience. And man, I'm so glad that you get a chance to hang with us today. We are once again in the book of James, and some of you might be like, man, when is this going to be done? I'm going to tell you, the thing I love about James is that every time we get to a new passage, it's a new theme, it's a new subject. And so it's not just the same thing over and over and over again, even though it's tied to a central theme and a central idea that James was aware that the early church that had been dispersed because of persecution, because of people branching out, because of it moving away from the central place in Jerusalem, that there were some things that were beginning to happen that did not line up with God's design for the church, that did not line up with why the church was instituted and why people were getting together. It was not meeting the standard. So James is aware of this, and James writes this letter to help change behavior. He writes this with this big word for letter, epistle, that is helping these churches understand, hey, I am aware of these things. I am going to speak to you about these things in hopes that this behavior changes. And we have seen everything from the way that you handle trials and tribulations, the way that you handle temptation, the way that you handle favoritism and partiality, the way that you handle the orphans and the widows, and you handle the poor or those that are less fortunate. You handle taming the tongue. There's so many of these things. And then it gets to this point in James 3, verses 13 through 18, where it talks about wisdom, and you're like, okay, I feel like now it's given me a little bit of this ability to go, okay, we've talked about this. Now, let's look at this idea of wisdom, and then let's look back at James 1, 2, 3, verses 1 through 12, and how do we apply what is being talked about now. So I'm gonna read this to you. And again, I'm reading out the English Standard Version. There in the online platform they have there, you are welcome to read along. There's a place there that you can actually look up James chapter 3, verses 13 through 18. But you don't have to look this up. But back in James 1, verse 5, it says this: if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. Now, okay, I'm going to read that to you again because I love repetition. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. So, if any of you lacks what we're about to talk about here in James 3, verses 13 through 18, ask God who wants to give generously to you. So that's what kind of set it up in James 1. And then we get to James 3, and we get to verses 13 through 18. So I'm going to read this out. So it says, who is wise in understanding among you? Like, that's the first question out the deal. And so I want to ask you, before we get too far into this, who, now, not famous people, not historical people. These are people that you know, and I realize that everyone that you know are also historical people. So for those of you that, are sarcastic, I appreciate it. But what I'm talking about is like people that you actually had a relationship with. Who are some of the wisest people that you know? Like, who are wise people that are in your life or have been in your life? But right out the gate, in this passage, after he's talked about everything that he's talked about in James 1 and 2, after he's talked about taming the tongue, he then says, who is wise and understanding among you? Now, I imagine that the people that are reading this letter kind of are reading through it and go, oh, like we don't struggle with that, or we struggle with that, or how dare James deal with this? Like reading the letter and maybe getting a little defensive and whatever, but then they just get to this, who is wise and understanding among you? Like, I love the fact that James is asking a question that's making these people be curious, that's making these people think through who is wise and understanding among you. And right away, what they probably began to do is put a definition onto wisdom that may or may not have lined up with what James is about to line up. Now, often when we think of wise people, we think of smart, intellectual, scholarly, intellect type people, well educated. And I truly believe all of that can be attributes of a wise person. But I also think you can be very uneducated, not scholastic, not scholarly, not labeled as an intellectual, and be incredibly wise. So as we look at this, I believe that there are people that fit so many different demographics and people that fit so many like types of people that are creative or more emotional or they're intellectual or they love to be learned and love to read or they love to listen to podcasts or they love just to listen to people and to get stories. I believe that just like now, James is writing to a bunch of people that were like all over the place when it comes to the type of people. And so it says this, who is wise and understanding among you? Then he gives this answer, which is not what I would have expected. He says, by his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. That idea of meek is kind of like this gentleness with strength. It's not this like just super weak type deal. It's like gentleness with strength. So who is wise and understanding among you? Then he says, by his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness and this gentle strength of wisdom. But if you have bitter, and then he goes into, but if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. So right away, he's helping understand, listen, because you got to remember, and we've talked about this the previous weeks, in this time, there were a lot of people that were wanting to be teachers. There were a lot of people that were wanting to be rabbis. There were a lot of people that understood that favor came with many of those titles, teacher, rabbi, and were not filling the role that was intended for that. And so they were literally kind of acting as these teachers and rabbis, and it was a false sense of who they were. And so he's helping them understand, but if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This idea that, listen, if you have this in examine your life and in your heart, if you have this bitter jealousy, if you have selfish ambition in your hearts, in the totality of what makes up who you are, do not boast and be false to the truth. Also, almost like if you're having this bitter jealousy and this selfish ambition, be careful that you're calling yourself wise. Verse 15, this is not the wisdom that comes down from above. He's separating this idea that there is an earthly grounded wisdom in just what we're able to identify as this that we know. And then there is another wisdom. It says this is not the wisdom that comes down from above, signifying that there is a godly wisdom and then there is another kind of wisdom. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, talking about bitter jealousy and selfish ambition. So this is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. Now, in some of the stuff I was reading, here's a great definition. Earthly, having this life only in view. Now think about that. Often we hear, oh man, that's just worldly. That's just earthly. This is a great definition. Earthly, in this context, having this life only in view. Not having an eternal or spiritual perspective, or not having a perspective that has to do with God and what makes up who He is, and this, in the eternal being of who He is. It is just having this life, this world in view. Verse 16. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist. Now, he's hitting this hard. Listen, when I talk to my kids, here's what I say. If they're like lying to me, over and over again, it beats them down. Okay, I know you're lying to me. Okay, I know you're lying to me. It's literally like an interview in a mirror. Not in a mirror, in a movie. Like I want to stick him in a dark room with a light right above him. I want to sit backward in a chair and I want to look at him. I'm like, I know you're lying to me. Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I'm guessing and just trying to catch them. But this idea of, I know, like, you're lying. Like, I know, like, I am trying to help them understand. I know the situation. You are lying. And every once in a while, if I get real, I'm like, you're a liar. Like, I'm not saying it's a great parenting moment, but I am repeating to them what I know to be true. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, so he's just hammering that, there will be disorder in every vile practice. There will be disorder in every vile practice. Like when you think about this idea of having like disorder in every vile practice, that there are things that are happening because of this selfish ambition, because of the fact that these things are going on that are not consistent, that are only in view of this life, that are not in view of this eternity. That is not an eternal godly view. It's helping us understand that when we read this, that listen, jealousy and selfish ambition will lead to disorder in every vile practice. Now, when you look at this every vile practice, I mean, what is every vile practice mean? I mean, there are times that you look in Scripture and like it tells you these are these attributes, and then the opposite of that, which are really bad, are these. But if you think about the idea that James literally put every kind of practice that was against who God is, every practice that is vile and not what it should be, every single one of those is possible, and the disorder is possible with jealousy and selfish ambition existing. Now, I'm not a jealous person when it comes to like my relationship with Amy. I've just never been. Amy and I have always been able to like have this really cool relationship to where like we've just not had to deal with that. Now that's not saying that we're better than anyone else. Like you should hear us fight sometimes. We're not better than anybody else, okay? We're sometimes we get in these cycles and all of a sudden things get brought up and usually me don't handle things well. But jealousy between each other has never been that big a deal. Now, though, in ministry, I struggle with jealousy hardcore. It's one of the reasons I'm not on social media right now, because as I looked at all these ministries around the country, I was just like, well, that's incredible. Like, and I would compare myself to that. So, like, that's not a big thing in one area, but in another area, it is this massive thing for where jealousy, selfish ambition, man, I want certain things. There's like, at times, like, it's easy to struggle with the idea of, I want to be known for this. And so, I get this. And when that jealousy and selfish ambition, I have seen evidence in my life where vile things do creep up and are exposed, where disorder does creep up and it's exposed. And then it says this in verse 17, but it says, but the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere, and a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. So it's giving you these ideas of, hey, listen, wisdom cannot be a part of selfish ambition, cannot be a part of jealousy. It doesn't even talk about the intellect of it. Who is wise and understanding in verse 13? And then it goes right into, by his good conduct, let him show. The way that he has action, the way that he moves, the way that she has action, the way that she moves, the way that she leads her life and acts out the way that she walks through the world, that is an evidence of wisdom. Not just what she has taken in content-wise, but it is the conduct. It is the way that they have walked in the meekness of wisdom. The gentle strength of wisdom is evidence of wisdom. And that word wise there, the idea is, who is wise and understanding, is that the wisdom of ultimate things. Well, how are you able to have process, or how are you able to have this connection to ultimate things? Well, if you think about God, and if we believe that he is who he says he is, as eternal God, who is all-knowing, he's all-powerful. When you think about that is the ultimate relationship. That is the ultimate being. Well, the ultimate being, it makes sense that the ultimate being knows what ultimate wisdom is. And if we want to be connected to ultimate wisdom, we have to be connected to God. And he is saying, who is wise and understanding? Who wants to be connected to that? By his good conduct. Let's make sure that the way that you are acting out in your life is evidence of the wisdom that is inside you. Verse 17, back to verse 17. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, and impartial and sincere. I want to read some of these things to you from a commentary that I found, because there's no way that I could say it this well. There's no way that I could kind of try to reword this in a way that was better than what I've read. So here's what it says. This wisdom is first pure. The reference is not to sexual purity, but to the absence of any sinful attitude or motive. So this is not trying to talk about, hey, there's some kind of sexual purity that needs to happen here, or that kind of stuff. It's talking about that that there is an absence of any sinful attitude or motive. I'm going to be honest with you. When it comes to this idea of sinful motive, I think of so many times where, man, I am not acting out wise and understanding by my conduct. That I have these ulterior motives. That I have like, what is this going to do for me? Or like, is this going to allow me to finally look better than another person? I told you, jealousy in ministry, it's been something I've really struggled with. And it's still hard even to this day. This wisdom is then peaceable. Looking at, like, what does that word peaceable mean? It's looking at gentle and kind, although in reality, there's every reason to be stern and punitive. The wisdom is gentle. This idea that there's an ability to forgive when strict justice gives him a perfect right to condemn. This wisdom is willing to yield. It's not stubborn. It's not obstinate. That there's this idea that true wisdom is not rigid, but is willing to listen and skilled in knowing when wisely to yield. That there's this idea of, listen, I understand what I believe and I understand what is right and I understand what is wrong, but that there's a curiosity to have the margin and space to step back and go, okay, let me listen to this. What can I learn? Not compromising what God says and not compromising what you know in your heart because of your connection to God to do, but that you have this ability to kind of step back and I'm willing to yield and to hear from you. And I'm willing to allow myself to not be stubborn enough to be able to lean into what you're saying and see how that leads me toward truth. This wisdom is full of mercy. It does not judge others strictly on the basis of law, but will extend a generous hand full of mercy. This wisdom is full of good fruits. This wisdom can be seen by the fruit it produces. It isn't just the inner power to think and talk about things the right way. It is full of good fruits. This wisdom was without partiality. It's without judging. This wisdom is without hypocrisy. It's without pretending to be what it is not. And then I love this. It says this, acting always in its own character, never working under a mask. In those last two words, it talks about partiality without hypocrisy, that it rule out the habit of speech to use to half reveal or to only reveal half and to conceal another part, the mind of the speaker, who is keeping something in the back of his mind at all times. The idea of that true wisdom does not hold back something and only give half the truth, or only reveal half and conceal the other half. And then it says, a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. So, when I think of wisdom, I've always had this idea of someone who is experienced and tenured in a certain area and is able to give advice and is able to lean into and to speak life into and to speak words into something because of that. And what I want to make sure is that I've got to be really careful that everything that I just said is possible. But at the same time, is that experience and is that tenure based around what I have seen them in their connection with God? That by their good conduct, let them show the works and meekness of wisdom. Not just by what they say. Remember, you got to be a doer, not just a hearer. Like, you've got to be careful the way that you use your tongue. That we've got to make sure that there is good conduct, that there is something that backs up everything that I was saying here. That there is wisdom that is pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy, full of good fruits, impartial and sincere. That what you are seeing, the conduct that you are seeing from people is pure, peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. When I think about these ideas of what wisdom truly is, it makes me stop. And I know that we've heard these words a lot, curiosity and confession. And that curiosity and confession give us an opportunity as we get curious with what's going on around us. We get curious with God, confess that to others that we trust, and confess that to God. It's able to lead us to connection to others and to God. But as I think about this idea of, okay, Chuck, evaluate yourself right now. How wise are you? Not how smart you are, not what is your IQ, Not even what is your emotional quotient or your creative quotient or your intellectual quotient. But looking at James 3, knowing in James 1:5, he said, look, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God. So if any of you lacks this, if any of you lacks the wisdom from above that is pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. If any of you lacks that, let him ask God. It perfectly connects James 1:5 and James 3:13 through 18. And when I read that list of people, often I got to go, I'm in need of wisdom. I am in need of wisdom. So many times in my moments, but so many times where my conduct, does it back up peaceable and pure and gentle and all the other things that were read there? As a church, when you think about what was going on, if he is leaning into these things, you got to think what was happening that makes James write this portion about wisdom in the church. What were teachers and leaders trying to do? What were people that were in the church trying to do? How much non-peace, non-gentleness, non-reasonable, non-mercy, all this other stuff, how much of that was happening that James needed to include verses 13 through 18 in here? And now in my life, and in the life of the collective church, my desire is that we are a church of wisdom. That we are a church that seeks wisdom, that desires wisdom, that can evaluate and get curious and go, God, in this, I don't have wisdom. God, right now, in this, there's nothing peaceable or gentle or reasonable happening to me right now. God, I want to ask that to you, and I pray, God, would you please give that to me generously? As a church, that's how I want us to move forward as small groups, as an online community, and as these gatherings. But the collective as a whole, I want us to move forward as a church that can ask the question, who is wise and understanding among you? And we see evidence of the things that verses 13 and 18 here exist within our church, exist within the way that we make decisions, exist in the way that we spend money, exist in the way that we invest in people, exist in the way that we lead our small groups and lead this time online and the times that we have the gatherings that lean into people. If we are to be an authentic community that engages other communities to authentically connect to God and to each other, we need to look and go, who is wise and understanding among you? And then when we look at the way that it lines up what that looks like, that we get to be honest and evaluate and get curious and go, God, if that is not me, you have said in James 1:5 that if we're lacking wisdom, to ask for it, and you want to give it generously, that you desire. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. We have got to be a wise church. We've got to be an understanding church. I've got to be a wise and understanding individual. You've got to be a wise and understanding individual. It doesn't mean that we're always going to get it exactly right, but consistently that we are walking a journey as individuals and as families and as groups and as communities and as a church that leads us to look at these descriptions and go, this is our desire. Not only to be wise, but our desire is to meet these qualifications and then to continue to evaluate. And if we're not meeting that as individuals and families and groups, that we can turn to God and say, God, I am lacking wisdom. Would you please give it to me, knowing and believing he wants to give it to us generously? I believe that James wrote this to a church because he saw a system that was happening and goes, we have got to turn this around. And now I believe that the collective church NWA, that we are a church that wants to base who we are and what we do and the way that we walk forward as an authentic community in a wise and understanding, peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere, that we want to walk forward in that way as a wise and understanding individual, family, group, and as a church and the collective and the church, the global church as a whole. As you guys go into your small groups today, not your small groups, your homes, or wherever you are talking about this, I'd love for you guys to just begin discussing this. And then just know this, listen, in the chat today, I just desire that as you feel led to share, man, please share. Please never feel pressure to share. Please never feel pressure to do anything but just listen and engage and just even let the chat just like bless you and minister to you with the things that God is kind of revealing to everyone else. But if you desire to type something in there with the chat, just know that we appreciate you trusting us with that. So I want to thank you so much for being a part of this today. I want to thank you for being a part of this journey through James, because I really do believe that every single time that we look at one of these passages, it gives us an example, and it gives us these ideas of, as individuals, families, groups, and as the collective church as a whole, of what we need to be striving for. So I look forward to seeing the chat today. Thank you so much. Have an incredible day, an incredible week, and I can't wait to see you next week.